This podcast is brought to you by Intranaturals, an honest, natural, and high-quality brand of supplements available only online. People's Pharmacy listeners get 25% off their first order using the code PEOPLES25 at intranaturals.com. That's code PEOPLES25 for 25% off at intranaturals.com. Acid-suppressing medications like Nexium and Prilosec are thought to be among the safest drugs in the pharmacy. Have we been misled? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Are there other ways to control heartburn besides proton pump inhibitors? What about diet? Are there foods you should avoid?
Have you had a flu shot this season? Did you experience shoulder pain or stiffness that lasted for more than a couple of days?
We're talking about the health headlines, and we'd like to hear from you. Do you have a question about statins, sleeping pills, PPIs, or other medications? Call us, 888-472-3366.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, the health news that matters to you.
First, the news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, scientists at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota have identified a new type of bacteria that can cause Lyme disease. For decades, Lyme disease has been associated with infection with Borrelia burgdorferi. It was originally discovered in Lyme, Connecticut in the 1970s. A number of children were diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and researchers were looking for the cause and eventually focused on deer ticks in the kids' backyards. Since then, Lyme disease has spread from New England to nearly half the counties in the U.S., and 300,000 people are infected every year. Now, Minnesota researchers, in collaboration with the CDC, have found that not all cases of Lyme disease in that region are caused by Borrelia burgdorferi. The new species they identified has been provisionally named Borrelia mayonnae. It's transmitted by the same species of ticks, and treatment is the same, but symptoms are slightly different. B. mayonnae is more likely to cause nausea, vomiting, and generalized rashes rather than the so-called bullseye rash considered typical of classic Lyme disease. Now that we know there's a new version of Lyme disease, doctors will need to be alert as it begins spreading across the country.
Speaking of infections, the Zika virus has captured headlines for weeks as public health officials try to play catch-up on this global health epidemic. Another mosquito-borne infection, dengue fever, is also starting to make headlines, especially in Hawaii. An outbreak of this disease on the Big Island has led the mayor of Hawaii County to declare a state of emergency. That's because more than 250 cases of dengue fever have been confirmed since the fall. Symptoms of this disease include a sudden high fever, skin rash, incapacitating headaches, and pain behind the eyes, muscle and joint pain, debilitating fatigue, digestive upset, bruising, or bleeding. In some cases, dengue fever can progress to a life-threatening complication called dengue hemorrhagic fever, which may lead to massive bleeding and collapse of the circulatory system. Dengue fever now infects as many as 100 million people worldwide every year.
Just how risky is obesity for long-term health? The Affordable Care Act permits employers to charge their unhealthy employees more for health care coverage. But the measures used to determine who has an unhealthy lifestyle include BMI as measure of weight for height. The BMI is used to say who is obese, but it does not actually distinguish who is physically fit and metabolically healthy. According to psychologists at UCLA, using a BMI of 30 as the criterion could misclassify 54 million Americans as unhealthy. What's more, 20.7% of those found to have a BMI in the normal range actually had disturbed metabolic markers. As a result, the researchers say BMI alone should not be used to determine who should pay more for health insurance.
Cold season may be particularly dangerous for children susceptible to asthma. Children are especially vulnerable to complications of asthma when they come down with upper respiratory tract infections. Researchers have long wondered why severe asthma attacks tend to peak at the same times each year. Texas investigators determined that when cold viruses are most prevalent in the population, asthma attacks worsen. Health professionals and parents will need to keep these data in mind when children start sniffling and sneezing, so that if asthma symptoms develop, they can be treated aggressively and not allowed to get out of hand.
Children who eat eggs for breakfast consume fewer calories at lunchtime. That's the conclusion of a study that measured the impact of different breakfasts on eating behavior in kids. 40 children between 8 and 10 years of age were given 3 different breakfasts, each containing exactly 350 calories. One meal was made up primarily of cold cereal, another contained oatmeal, and the third was a high-protein egg-based breakfast. They could eat as much lunch or other food during the day as they desired. On days that the children had scrambled eggs, they consumed 70 fewer calories at lunch on average than when they had cereal or oatmeal. Even such a modest reduction in calories could have an impact on weight over time. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Humans have suffered from heartburn for all of history. I mean, just think what they were eating back in those days. Well, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, wrote about how certain foods could cause digestive distress. Once upon a time, doctors called indigestion dyspepsia. Now they frequently call it GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease.
And the answer very often is to prescribe a proton pump inhibitor. We call them PPIs for short. These acid-suppressing drugs were prescribed to 15 million people in 2013 at a cost of $10 billion. Billion, that is, with a B. That doesn't count the millions who now use over-the-counter drugs like Nexium 24-hour, Prilosec OTC, and Prevacid 24-hour, or the house brands of those drugs.
Well, to find out more about such medications, we turn to Lisa Gill. She's Deputy Content Editor of Best Buy Drugs for Consumer Reports.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Lisa Gill.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's nice to have you back. Lisa, there was a big study that just came out this week in JAMA Internal Medicine, very prestigious medical journal, about proton pump inhibitors, PPIs for short, acid-suppressing drugs. Can you tell us what they found?
Sure. So this is a very large study of over 10,000 people that were followed for a number of years. And study researchers wanted to understand the strength of the association between proton pump inhibitors, used very commonly to treat things like heartburn, acid reflux, and GERD, and chronic kidney disease, or even acute kidney disease and acute kidney function. What they found was the association was much stronger than what had been seen in previous studies. We had seen an association, there was a suggestion of it. It was running sort of as an undercurrent in other studies, but this one really brings it to the foreground.
Now, Lisa, you said association, and we hear this drumbeat of association is not causation, so we can't leap to the conclusion that the proton pump inhibitor drugs like Nexium or Prilosec are actually causing chronic kidney disease. But it seems like a good idea to be wary, doesn't it?
Right. It's a pretty strong association. I think that's what's important. You know, this is an observational trial. They are following people over a period of time. It's very good evidence. It's not a random controlled trial, which is obviously the gold standard, but it gives us a lot more information when thinking about whether or not for anyone to take a proton pump inhibitor, and it definitely now falls in the list of things that we are concerned about when we think about this drug.
Well, that brings up another point. Number one, this probably isn't the first study. I seem to recall some other research suggesting that these acid-suppressing drugs might affect the kidneys in an adverse way. Right. And then number two, there are some some other complications with these drugs.
There are some of the, in addition to the risk of kidney disease, some of the things that we talk about routinely are, there's three things that always concern us and that we always want to mention. I think that they're good to know, especially if you're going to take these for, you really only should take them for a short period of time. But one risk is bone fractures. And probably most listeners wouldn't have thought about that because you're thinking, oh, this is a medication to treat, my stomach, my GI tract. What does it have to do with my bones? But it can weaken bones and actually cause fractures. So that is an important danger to think about. The other one is risk of infections, and two kind of infections come to mind, important ones. One is pneumonia, and the other one is a risk of something called C. difficile, which is it's a bacterial infection that can result from taking proton pump inhibitors. C. difficile, or C. diff for short, can be very difficult to treat. It is a terrible complication that can result from this, and it is one reason that you definitely do not want to take these longer than what is indicated on the label that you see on the over-the-counter packaging or on the prescription, which is usually just a few weeks.
Well, that raises another interesting point, and that is it's available over the counter, and I think a lot of folks assume that these are really super safe drugs. I mean, that's what we were told for decades. No problem, Prilosec, Prevacid, Nexium, Acifex. These are the super safe drugs, and doctors prescribed them to, huge numbers of people. And then the FDA said, in fact, they're so safe, you can have access to them over the counter. So now you can get Nexium 24, you can get Prilosec, Prevacid, without any medical supervision. And yes, it does say you're only supposed to take them for 14 days, as I understand it, 2 weeks. And you can do that 3 times a year. But I'd bet a lot of people with heartburn take them for a lot longer.
No, we know that for sure. In fact, some studies suggest that as many as 70% of people, so, it's a tremendous number of people, 70% are inappropriately taking some type of proton pump inhibitor like Nexium, like Prilosec, like Prevacid. And you are exactly right. These drugs, the original intent was that you would go to the doctor, talk about your heartburn or any other sort of GI pain you were experiencing. That kind of pain can be the result of other things. And it's important to have that conversation with your doctor instead of just rushing to a drug. But as doctors, were prescribing it and it became available slowly over the counter, we saw just an explosion of how many people use these and for how long. And it's a very unfortunate consequence of prescription drugs going over the counter. And, I think they thought of it like allergy drugs, like, well, everybody's got allergies and everybody's got heartburn. Why don't we just make it available? But I think there's many more dangers to these medications than is what really it's sort of they're underappreciated in that regard. But there's other medications too that are available over the counter that are, to me, pose equal dangers, and that includes even just simple everyday Tylenol. So acetaminophen, and I don't want to take us too far away, but there's a medication that when taken just a little over what is the recommended dosage can cause liver damage and liver failure, and that's a pretty significant thing and happens quite often. I think it just goes to show us that medications used or available over the counter, it doesn't mean you should just rush to them. It doesn't mean that they are a substitute for speaking with your physician.
And it does suggest that you really do need to read those over-the-counter labels very, very carefully.
And most people don't.
And follow the instructions.
Right.
One advantage of following the instructions for just taking Nexium or Prilosec over the counter for only 2 weeks is you probably won't have any trouble stopping after just 2 weeks. But if you take it for 2 months, you may not be able to stop.
Exactly. It's a really good point, Terry, and it's true with a lot of medications, and it is definitely true with the proton pump inhibitors. You really have to work your way off of them, and stopping cold turkey is not a great idea.
So what's the message for our listeners, Lisa Gill?
So the important thing is, if you have daily heartburn, this is actually an indicator that you need to see a physician. Heartburn seems like it's just something that's caused by too much pepperoni pizza or too many hot dogs, and that's understandable. But when it's not necessarily related to what you're eating, and it is something that's gone on for a couple of weeks on a daily basis, get to the physician first. Don't just rush out and buy over-the-counter Nexium because you saw an ad for it, or Prilosec, or Prevacid for that matter. And for everyday heartburn, these drugs are way too powerful. Stick with Tums and Rolaids, and if that doesn't work, try Pepsid AC or something a little more stronger than just an acid, but don't jump immediately to this very powerful class of drugs. There are very serious and risks that need to be considered.
Lisa Gill, thanks so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Lisa Gill. She is Deputy Content Editor of Best Buy Drugs for Consumer Reports. There's a link to the website from peoplespharmacy.com.
And we'd love to hear from you. What's your experience with proton pump inhibitors? If you used a proton pump inhibitor over the counter, did you follow the instructions to only take this acid suppressor for 2 weeks? Give us a call. The number is 888-472-3366.
Have you ever tried to stop taking a PPI? Tell us how you did it. Do you have a favorite remedy for heartburn? Our lines are open. The number again, 888-472-3366. You can email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com, or reach us via Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy. Again, that phone number if you've had experience with proton pump inhibitors or a home remedy for heartburn, 888-472-3366.
Joe, I believe, and you may correct me if I am wrong, I trust that you will, I believe that the proton pump inhibitors were initially introduced to treat ulcers.
Exactly. And for that purpose, they are great because they help heal the ulcer more effectively than most of the other medications available. So if you're diagnosed with an ulcer by your doctor, the absolute correct prescription would be a proton pump inhibitor. And the trouble is that you can't really self-diagnose an ulcer very easily. I mean, yeah, it hurts, but it could be heartburn. And as Lisa said, you got to talk to a doctor if this is a recurrent problem. Now, there are some vitamin and mineral deficiencies. We've talked about this before. Terry, what are they?
Well, the trouble is that our bodies are designed to actually have acid in our stomachs, and we use that acid to help us absorb certain nutrients. Vitamin B12 is especially important, but also minerals like magnesium, zinc, calcium, and iron.
Now, vitamin B12 is one of those vitamins that, you wouldn't know you were deficient in it. What would be some of the symptoms of vitamin B12 deficiency?
Symptoms of vitamin B12 deficiency can include neurological problems like tingling, a little numbness in the fingers or the feet. Fatigue is frequently a symptom of vitamin B12 deficiency. The trouble is that some of the symptoms are so sort of nonspecific that the doctor might not identify that immediately as the concern that it is vitamin B12 deficiency. And the test for vitamin B12 deficiency can sometimes be a little tricky.
So if you've been taking one of these PPIs for a long period of time,
you probably should ask your doctor to run a vitamin B12 test on you. It is a blood test. He may need to run 2 different ones that run in tandem, and to see how that goes.
And you might want to ask to have your magnesium levels checked, because this condition called hypomagnesemia is not uncommon with PPIs, and symptoms can include muscle cramps. So a lot of people who go, oh, my legs hurt, they may need to get their magnesium tested.
Exactly right.
Well, we need to take a break. When we come back, we'd like to hear from you about remedies you use for indigestion.
Flu season has been slow to start, but now it's underway. What can you do to avoid the flu?
Join the conversation at 888-472-3366 or email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon. I'm a pharmacologist.
And I'm Terry Graydon. I'm a medical anthropologist. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Intra Naturals Nutritional Supplements. Information on how they're redefining nutrition can be found at intranaturals.com.
And by Redex Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that moisturize deeply to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you would like to purchase a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. It's show number 1024. Or you can find it on our website. It's peoplespharmacy.com.
Today we're talking about the health news that matters to you. We're discussing the treatments for heartburn. What works for you? You can share your favorite home remedy or a PPI story. Our lines are open at 888-472-3366. If you can't get through, you can email us radio@peoplespharmacy.com or via Twitter. We're at People's Pharmacy. Again, that number to join the conversation, 888-472-3366.
And Joe, we go to Esther in Maryland. Esther, Tresaptown, is that where you are?
Cresaptown, Maryland, yes. Good morning, Joe.
Hi, Esther. What's on your mind?
About 10 years ago, I had heartburn and acid reflux, and I had gone to my family practitioner, and he prescribed the proton pumps. And then I read about ginger root. Now, the cause of my heartburn was drinking too much lemonade, which caused acid. And when I started taking the ginger root, after that, I didn't have any reflux, and I discontinued the proton pump, and that was really all I needed. And the ginger root, it is similar to an aspirin without any kind of side effects, and it is really a wonderful thing for many different things. But acid reflux is one of them that it really does well with.
Okay, well, Esther, thank you so much for, offering that opportunity to solve the problem. I mean, what's interesting about your call is that the lemonade triggered the problem, and I wonder, if it was partly the sugar in with the lemons that could have contributed, because what we've heard, Terry, is that when people, have a lot of carbs and, sugar, it's sort of, can make things worse. So lemonade was the trigger, but the PPIs weren't that effective, and then along comes the ginger. Now, isn't it interesting? Ginger has been used for a very long time. I mean, hundreds of years.
Actually, probably thousands of years, if you're looking at China, which is where people first started using it.
Yeah. So we're not at all surprised, Esther, to hear that ginger was effective for your heartburn. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Let's go to Zephyr Hills, Florida. Hi, Vicki. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Hi. I'd like to say my remedy is to stop eating the food that makes it. And first you have to find out what makes it. And I found out it was red meat for me.
Okay, well, Vicki, how sensible is that? Stop eating the food that gives you heartburn. So how did you do the experiment?
Well, I was recommended my doctor to do the acid, and then I said, no, I don't want to do that. That's stupid. Just stop eating the food. And I found out through trial and error that red meat made me have it.
No, that's so interesting.
What a very good idea.
Trial and error, Terry, is really the only test we have.
Because people react differently to different foods.
Exactly.
And some people can eat things and not have heartburn, and other people get heartburn from those same foods.
And it turns out that there have been a couple of studies. Dr. Westman at Duke has reported that high carbohydrate diets can trigger.
Yeah, Dr. Westman at Duke and Dr. Nick Shaheen at UNC teamed up to do that study, maybe almost 8 or 10 years ago, quite a while back.
Yeah. We have an email. This is from Kay in North Carolina. Kay says, I'm a long-time PPI user. 2 years ago, I suffered a fracture in my foot. I thought it was a fluke. I suffered with this fracture for well over a year. I continued my PPI regimen, not knowing what was happening in my body. About a year later, I fractured a vertebra in my back, doing nothing out of the ordinary. My doctor tested me and found I had osteoporosis, which is not common in a 50-year-old male. Still not linking it to PPIs, I fractured another vertebra. Internet searches suggested a link to PPIs. I finally quit my PPI cold turkey. The pain from the acid reflux was unbearable. Believe it or not, apple cider vinegar diluted in water actually helped me get over the worst pain from the acid reflux. Today, I'm in constant pain from my fractures. I think these are due to my long-term use of PPIs, both prescribed and over-the-counter. Comment?
Well, of course, Joe, we can't say whether his fractures specifically are due to his PPI use or whether he might have some other conditions going on. But it certainly is plausible. We know that long-term PPI use does make you more susceptible to fractures. We go to Tampa, Florida. KX, welcome to the People's Pharmacy. Tell us about your situation.
Hi, I'm a 30-year Marine veteran and have been with the VA now for about 3 years. Prior to leaving the military, they put me on either Nexium or Prilosec, and then after I got out, because I was still having heartburn, I'm now taking one in the morning and one at night. And I've been doing that for years.
And your question?
Well, my point is that it's kind of amazing because I do have signs of kidney disease, which I thought was from being on pain pills for years.
Aha.
Well, KX, we obviously are not in a position to be able to diagnose your situation. Nobody probably can. But the fact that your kidneys are not at 100% has, maybe something to do with both the pain medicine and the PPIs. That's a question that if I were you, I would raise with my doctors.
Absolutely. And since you're getting care from the VA, they should be aware of this problem and they should be able to help you. If you no longer need the PPI, they should be able to help you gradually stop taking them because usually that's what's necessary in order to get off, is to very gradually lower the dose.
Well, that's exactly what I'd like to do now that I've heard your show, so I appreciate it.
KX, thank you very much for the call. Bye-bye. Terry, getting off these drugs can be a challenge.
Indeed it can. We do have another remedy, if you're ready, from Gwen in Bridgeport, West Virginia. She said, I've read that as we age, the acid reflux might be a symptom of not enough acid in the stomach. It sounds counterintuitive, but rather than trying to suppress acid, try apple cider vinegar, a couple of tablespoons in water twice a day. And she says, I have personally had real success with this remedy. And we certainly have heard this remedy from other people.
It seems so counterintuitive. Like, really? Apple cider vinegar for heartburn? That's nuts. And yet, as you point out, we've heard from many people that say it works. What are some of the other remedies that people
another
report?
remedy Nancy emailed us is don't eat after 5 o'clock in the evening. Very sensible.
Absolutely. And people tell us chewing gum is a good alternative because it increases saliva production. We've mentioned that many times. Others tell us a handful of almonds.
That's right, a handful of almonds or just sipping some chamomile or ginger tea.
Now, Terry, we have an email here with a different perspective, okay? This is from Heather. Heather says, it seems like every other day you have yet another doomsday article about PPIs. It's very discouraging to those of us who suffer from GERD and reflux and need these medicines. I was diagnosed with pre-Barrett's esophagus, and these drugs actually reversed it. I am terrified to go off them and risk esophageal cancer. Some people really need these powerful medicines.
Well, it is true that some people need these powerful medicines. I think we mentioned earlier that they are excellent for healing ulcers. There are people with special conditions. I mean, they're fairly rare conditions, but like something called Zollinger-Ellison syndrome.
Now, what is Barrett's esophagus?
Barrett's esophagus is a situation in which the tissue at the base of the esophagus, where it joins onto the stomach, those cells start looking different and they start overgrowing. They're not growing the way they should. And that could be a sign that they are getting ready to turn into a cancerous tumor. We worry a lot about that because esophageal cancer is very nasty. And people with Barrett's esophagus are indeed at higher risk of developing esophageal cancer. The thing is, you say, well, people with Barrett's esophagus are at higher risk of developing esophageal cancer, and that part's true. But the absolute risk is not very high.
But here's where it gets really complicated. So a lot of doctors say you've got to take a PPI to prevent the Barrett's esophagus from turning into esophageal cancer, which is a hard-to-treat cancer, by the way. And there is a meta-analysis in a very reputable journal called Gut back in August of 2014 that says if you just take a PPI, it will fix Barrett's esophagus. So that was pretty clear. Meta-analysis, good studies, very impressive, pretty much convinced a lot of gastroenterologists they were absolutely doing the right thing by prescribing Nexium and company. But then along came a Danish epidemiology study published in Alimentary Pharmacology and Therapeutics back in May of 2014. And this was a really interesting study because it involved almost 10,000 patients with Barrett's esophagus. They followed these folks from 1995 to 2009. And what they found was that those patients who were best at taking their PPIs, they call that high adherence, or took them for a long period of time, actually had more adenocarcinoma of the esophagus, and it didn't protect. The PPIs did not have a preventive effect against cancer. So that's rather confusing.
It is very confusing, and part of the reason is that we're looking at two different types of studies. The absolute gold standard studies for figuring out whether or not a drug actually works for something, efficacy, is the randomized controlled trial, and that presumably are some of what the meta-analysis was looking at. But the trouble with randomized controlled, No,
the meta-analysis was epidemiology.
Okay. What I was going to say is randomized controlled trials really have a hard time picking up something like this because you would have to have so many people and half of them randomly taking a drug and half of them randomly taking a placebo. It would be very, very difficult to make a study that large, to be able to pick up something that's so infrequent.
Right, and you'd have to do these studies for a very long period of time. There have been two new studies, one in Expert Opinions in Drug Safety, just published in January of 2016, suggesting that there might be an increased risk of adenocarcinoma associated with PPIs, especially if people had something called Helicobacter pylori. So bottom line, if you're a doctor or a patient, this is an evolving story and it is complicated. Let's go right back to the phones, Terry. Where would you like to go next?
Well, let's talk to Samuel in Binghamton, New York. Samuel, welcome to the People's Pharmacy. What's your solution?
Hi, I had a tendency towards overeating, nervous eating, and eating too quickly, and my solution was to pay attention to when I'm full, to eat much more slowly, put the fork down between bites, don't pick it up until I'm done chewing and swallowing. If I'm eating popcorn, one kernel at a time. If I'm at a restaurant, order foods that slow me down, like snails with black bean sauce. Takes so long to get the snail out of the shell. Little things like that really helped, and really paying attention to am I really hungry before I eat? anymore because I had a tendency towards nervous eating. Also, if I was eating nuts, I'd get the nuts in the shell so that I'd have to crack them and slow myself down, things like that.
Sounds very sensible, Samuel, and it worked for your heartburn.
Not only did it work for my heartburn, but I lost some weight because I wasn't overeating. And I think that when you take drugs to allow yourself to overeat more, you're going to kill yourself from a heart attack.
Hey, Samuel, thank you so much for the call. I love your suggestion. I think a lot of us could benefit from slowing down and eating more thoughtfully.
And speaking of heart attacks, Joe, we did not mention, but there has been an association, not causation, but association between long-term PPI use and the risk of heart attack, what the doctors call myocardial infarction.
Let's go to Tampa, Florida. Hi, Del. You're on the People's Pharmacy.
Hi, Joe and Terry. Carbonated water works for me 100% of the time.
How do you use it?
I just drink it until after, when it starts in, then I'll just consume carbonated water. Maybe mixed it with a little bit of juice or something like that. Basically, what I'm doing is making soda pop of sorts to get the sweet taste and get the carbonated water in there. Once I get the clear burp, it's gone.
Well, thanks for that. A lot of people have been talking about that burp for years with baking soda, Terry.
Right, and that is certainly something that people have used to neutralize the acid that has splashed up into the esophagus to cause the acid reflux, the pain of heartburn. And so carbonated water sounds like a very sensible solution.
Lenny in Brandon, Florida. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. Your story.
Hi, Joe and Terry. Thank you. I've been diagnosed with Barrett's esophagus, and just last year I lost my little brother to esophageal cancer.
Oh,
and my doctor, which is also the VA, prescribed me on omeprazole.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, is that a PPI? But they told me that I have to take that for pretty much the rest of my life just to keep my acid down to protect my esophagus. So I'm kind of wondering where that drug falls in and if there's any truth in that.
Well, Lenny, it is a PPI, and you may need to keep taking it because being that you have a family history, you're in an especially high-risk category.
The one thing I would like you to do, Lenny, is visit our website after the show and look at the references that we have with regard to PPIs and Barrett's esophagus and esophageal cancer, and then make sure your doctors are aware of the latest research, including that Danish epidemiology study. Whatever happens, you will need to be scoped on a semi-regular basis to make sure that those cells are not starting to get a little squirrely. And you may, in fact, want to check in with Dr. Nicholas Shaheen at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He has developed a really interesting approach to dealing with abnormal cells in the esophagus to prevent them from going on to develop esophageal cancer. But hey, thank you so much for the call. We are going to take a short break, but when we come back, Terry, what are we going to talk about? It's flu season.
It is flu season, and we're going to talk about flu, and we're going to talk about flu shots and reactions to the flu.
We're also going to talk about how to wash and dry your hands. Are you a paper towel user, or do you like those jet air blowers?
And we're going to talk about beet juice. Should your doctor be prescribing it?
If you'd like to join the conversation, give us a call, 888-472-3366, or email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like this podcast of The People's Pharmacy and want to continue the conversation, you can join us online at facebook.com/People's Pharmacy to share your thoughts or comments. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Intra Naturals nutritional supplements. Information on how they're redefining nutrition can be found at intra naturals.com.
And Viredex Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions, helping dry, cracked skin feel utterly soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
And if you would like to purchase a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. It's show number 1024. You can also find it on our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
We're exploring the stories behind the health headlines today, and it is flu season. And so what to do? Well, a lot of people got their flu shot, Terry, and we have received hundreds of reports of shoulder pain. And this is really odd because the CDC says basically the flu shot is not a problem. You know, at worst, you'll get a little minor discomfort for a day or two, maybe a little redness and swelling. But what we're hearing from literally hundreds of folks is that this pain doesn't go away.
For some people, apparently, if the flu vaccine is injected at the wrong part of the arm, there is something called, and this is a governmental acronym, something called SIRVA, Shoulder Injury Related to Vaccine Administration, SIRVA. You can look it up online. It's there. It's apparently not very common, but it might be a little more common than we've been led to believe.
Yeah, and people are telling us, this pain has lasted for weeks. It's debilitating. It's hard for them to sleep at night, and we'd like to hear from you. Have you had a flu shot, and did you experience this shoulder thing? Our number, if you'd like to join the conversation, is 888-472-3366, or send us an email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com. And Terry, the other thing people are told at this time of year, besides get your flu shot, it's not too late, is wash your hands.
Oh, they are indeed. We are all told we should wash our hands, and it's good advice.
Yeah, but that's why my hands are so red, dry, and irritated.
It will definitely dry your hands out to wash them at this time, 60 times a day.
That's why you need to use a moisturizer every day.
You do. But then the question is, how do you dry them? If you're in a public restroom, they either have paper towels or they have one of those hot air blowers that sound so loud.
Like a jet engine. I swear, some of them are so loud they hurt my ears.
So which is better for drying hands?
Well, I'm a paper towel kind of guy.
And the reason is?
Well, I don't like the sound of the air dryers, but I think they work better. I think paper towels do the job.
It turns out that there's even some research that shows that paper towels, although the idea was that the air dryers would be more hygienic, paper towels actually work better for that purpose. And we have an email from Jackie who says, my son majored in biochemistry and minored in microbiology when he told me that his college instructors referred to the air blow dryers in bathrooms as fecal throwers. I never used them again.
I'd rather not think about that exactly, but it does turn out that you can distribute, shall we say, whatever is on your hands all around the room with those very powerful air dryers. And if they haven't been washed thoroughly, well, maybe that description is accurate.
Now, Joe, the CDC does have advice for people who want to avoid catching the flu. The CDC does start with get your flu vaccine. It also suggests you stay away from sick people, stay home when you're sick so you don't spread it around, cover your mouth and nose with a disposable tissue when you sneeze or cough, and then throw that tissue in the trash. Wash your hands, obviously, we've been talking about that, and don't touch your eyes, nose, or mouth, which is harder to do than it is to say.
There's a new study just out of MIT talking about sneezing, and they have pictures. And Terry, I'm telling you, this is gross, unbelievable what happens when people sneeze.
Well, this The study is actually about the physics of the fluid distribution, and it used to be thought that it was like, spritzing from water droplets out of a spray bottle, but it's not anything like that. It's more like throwing paint out of a can, and it's pretty disgusting.
These are these long strands of stuff. Oh.
It's because sneezes are slimy.
If you want to see how bad it is, you can just go online, put into your search engine MIT and sneezing, and you can see the videos for yourself. It's blah. You're going to want to cover your face. And if anybody sneezes in your direction,
Run for the hills.
Run for the hills, absolutely. Let's go to Winchester, Virginia. Hi, Steve. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. What's your story?
Hi, Terry and Joe. As a physical therapist, I've actually seen two people over the years who've had the vaccination shoulder pain. And it's really interesting. One day they're fine, they have the vaccination, and then, boom, the next day they've kind of lost the function of their arm. It really hurts to lift it up over their head. And I've treated it with, I think what the patient might get is like a shoulder bursitis. I kind of theorize that the injection's going into the bursa, kind of in the deltoid area.
Uh-huh.
And it's remarkable how their arm function changes. And my wife actually had it once, too. So it is certainly something I've come across. It's pretty interesting.
And how long does it take usually with physical therapy to clear up?
The two patients I've had, what I've had them do is deep friction massage to the area, some ice, and some simple active assistive arm exercises like sliding your arm up the wall where the wall is supporting it, and usually within about a week and a half. Interesting thing, though, is the patient had actually had it going on for 2.5 months before she sought physical therapy. So
it makes sense to get to a physical therapist, get the recommendations for those exercises.
Rub the tender area kind of aggressively and deeply, and then apply ice for a minute ice cube massage for a minute or two. And that may take care of it, and you don't have to spend the money coming to see a therapist.
All right, thanks, Steve.
Hey, thank you so much, Steve. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Let's go to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It looks like Kay may have had a similar kind of problem. Hi, Kay. You're on the People's Pharmacy.
Hi, yes. Since you asked for a response, this year was the first year I was given the super flu, and I just assumed that the extreme pain that I experienced in the first day after the shot was because it was a super dose, but perhaps that's not the case. The extreme pain only lasted for a day or two, but I had residual pain in that arm for about 6 weeks. It never occurred to me. I did call the pharmacy where I got the shot, and they said no, they hadn't had many people mention that and didn't suggest physical therapy. And I'm not sure my pain was extreme enough to need that, but thank you very much for that information. And also the information on the B vitamin. I had problems with tingling in my legs and fatigue, and my doctor suggested B vitamins for the fatigue, and my cardiologist suggested compression stockings for the tingling since no other explanation could be found. However, I broke a bone in my elbow recently and couldn't put on the compression stockings, and when I stopped wearing them, I discovered the tingling was gone. So it would seem that maybe it was because I've been taking those B vitamins all this time. Very interesting.
Okay, we do love to hear that kind of serendipitous success story. And those compression stockings are really helpful, but they're hard to put on.
Yes.
I can't imagine doing it with a broken arm.
Yes, that's right. But as I say, now I'm able to put them on, but I find I don't really need them anymore. The tingling is gone.
Thank you for the call. Bye-bye.
And thank you. Bye.
I wonder if the flu shot shoulder pain thing is because of bad shot placement. We've been told that. But could it also have something to do with the new version that are high potency and some are called the quadrivalent?
Right, as Kay suggested. I do not know.
Let's go to Dallas. Hi, Remy. You're on the People's Pharmacy.
Hi. In 2013 and 2014, I had my flu vaccine at a certain drugstore chain, and I had that nerve pain radiating from my shoulder to my back. and it was done in the same place. And the tech told me on the second year that's where they were trained to give that vaccine. So in 2015, I went to a hospital and had the flu vaccine done there, no pain.
Aha. So it may indeed be the location of the vaccination.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing your story. Bye-bye. So, Terry, what's this about beetroot juice and heart function?
Well, there was a very interesting study published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology Heart Failure, because they have several subdivisions to their journal. This was published quite recently, I think maybe this month, maybe last month. And what they did was they had a number of older people who had heart failure. They gave them, it wasn't a large number. You've got it in front of you, so you might be able to tell me exactly how many, but it was a modest number, maybe 20, maybe 30. But they had beet juice that they gave them. They had them exercise before they started taking the beet juice, and they measured their endurance. They had them take the beet juice either once or for the entire week, and then they measured their exercise endurance afterwards, and they found that the entire week worked better than the single dose for endurance.
Right.
But they both worked for blood pressure.
This was double-blind, randomized, the high quality. It was small, only 19 people, but these were mostly women, elderly patients with heart failure, and the symptoms were shortness of breath and fatigue. And they found that 2.4 ounces, so about a quarter of a glass of beet juice improved their endurance by 24% after a week. And Terry, we got a very cute email just the other day. Can you share that one, please?
We did. This person wrote to us to say that she and her husband are using beet juice to boost the power of Viagra, because she said the Viagra all by itself was really not doing the job. But after her husband started drinking beet juice for a couple of days before they planned to use the Viagra, she said the result was, and I'm quoting, "Oh, my goodness."
Oh, my goodness, indeed. Let's go back to Wisconsin. Terry, you're going to have to pronounce this town. Madeline?
Hi, Madeline. Are you in Waupaca, Wisconsin?
It's Waupaca.
Waupaca, thank you.
Yes, I have a grandson who was severely brain damaged from a flu shot, and it was all documented, but the doctor would not report it to the Center for Disease Control, and we didn't find out until years later that there's actually a government program that's set up to compensate people who have been damaged by any kind of a shot, and we didn't know that, and we don't understand why the government did not inform the people.
Well, your point is very well taken, Madeline, and that is that anyone who is harmed by a vaccine of any sort does have recourse. There is a place where you can go online to report the problem, and there is compensation. And Terry, I think we have a link.
I was going to say, you will actually find a link to 2 different sources from our website. The first source is a place to report a vaccine injury, because the FDA and the CDC are interested in vaccine-caused problems. They do collect them in a database called the Vaccine Adverse Event
Reporting System.
Right.
VAERS.
So we have a link to VAERS, and we also tell you how to get in touch with the compensation claims for victims of vaccine problems.
We go to Springfield, Missouri. David, you're a doctor, is that correct?
That's right, Joe.
And you have something to share with us about the flu shot.
The training for giving these flu shots may be flawed in some way. The subdeltoid bursa is in the upper arm, and so if the shot is given too deep and the chemicals get around or in the bursa, you could easily get the symptoms that are being described.
The bursitis symptoms.
Right.
Right. Well, thanks for letting us know about that.
And that communicates with the shoulder, so
it's going to cause shoulder pain and problems.
Dr. David, I'm assuming that patients should ask the person who gives them the flu shot to not put it too high?
I think that would help probably, or to pinch up the skin a little bit so the muscle is thicker where the shot is being given.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Especially in real thin people.
Okay. Yeah. People like me who have a little extra meat on our bones don't perhaps need to worry. Kathy, you've been holding for a long time in Hillsborough, North Carolina. We appreciate your call. We just have about a minute left. Can you ask your question briefly?
Yes, Joe and Terry, I took Protonics for 6 years for acid reflux. I stopped about 5 years ago, and last year I was diagnosed with degenerative disc disease, and I'm wondering if there could be any causation from the proton pump inhibitor that I was taking.
The answer is we don't know. It is possible that the Protonics put you at a somewhat higher risk, but it's also possible that you were already at higher risk for other reasons that we don't know anything about. So I wish we had a definitive answer for you, but we can't.
The answer, the best we can say is, Kathy, that the calcium and magnesium absorption issue has become important. There are some concerns there, and there is a linkage to osteoporosis, and whether or not that's responsible for the degeneration of your discs, unfortunately, we don't have a good answer. But thank you very much for the call. Terry, we are pretty much all out of time. I do want to thank all of our listeners for the wonderful stories and the questions that they had today. Really helpful. And I think, the message with regard to the flu is wash your hands, but stay away from anybody who is sniffling and sneezing.
And when you go to get your vaccine, make sure they give it properly.
Absolutely. That's all the time we have. Thank you for listening to The People's Pharmacy.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Sophie Copeland provided technical assistance. Al Wadarsky is the engineer. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care 20 Cream with 20% urea for extra skin protection. The number's 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
And if you'd like to order a CD of today's show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1024. That number again, 800-732-2334. You can also find it at our website, peoplespharmacy.com. And when you get to the site, you can tell us what you think about the show or find information on prescription drugs, herbs, and home remedies.
And if you'd like to find out more about the proton pump inhibitor story and the articles that we were talking about, you will find links to that research. You can also subscribe to the free podcast of our show or our free email newsletter. It's all there at peoplespharmacy.com. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Be sure to join us next week when we talk with Dr. Jane McGonigal about how gaming could help us improve our health.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.